This week on The Futurists, John Sviokla.
Artificial intelligence is so scary because our myths in the Western tradition around technology, smart technology, are all bad. Icarus, Prometheus, Frankenstein, Terminator, right? It never ends well.
Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and I am the host of The Futurists. My partner, Brett King, is on a well-deserved vacation. He's been working very hard for the past year, putting together our big events and traveling around the world to do his speaking and advisory work. Now, along the way, in the past year, we have heard so many people speculate and talk about artificial intelligence and their own perspectives and their own usage of it. And today, I'm bringing in someone who has the role of advising corporations on how to integrate AI, and particularly generative AI. And this is a really relevant topic because there's been so much news lately about organizations that don't quite know how AI fits into their plan. They'd like to use it. They find it attractive. They find the appealing messages might be relevant, but then when it comes time to test it out, it doesn't tend to work. So there's a role there for someone to advise them, and we have that person on our call today. Folks, a big welcome to John Sviokla. John has been a friend of mine for many years. We met when he was at PwC, where he was a practice leader there at that big advisory firm. And even at that time, which is way before the pandemic, he was already interested in AI. But John, since then, you've launched GAI Insights. So welcome to The Futurists. It's great to have you on the show today.
Rob, it's so great to see you again. Yes, it's lovely to be here.
It's good fun. It's been a while, and so I thought we would catch up a little bit. And so first thing we like to do on the show is tell people what it is that you actually do. And, actually, if you don't mind, frame it around the advisory services, because I find there's a fuzzy perception of what the big consulting firms actually do.
Yeah, sure. Well, we started our firm about 3 years ago, so we're a little firm. But at the big firms, they're really trying to help people with large projects and organizational transformation. I mean, that's really their bread and butter. When you get into the big firms, think of them as whaling ships. So they're out there looking for whales, and that's generally what they look for. And AI is obviously an area where a lot of people are starting to put a lot of emphasis and transformation.
It comes just in time, right? Because there was a good 15-year run of ERP, things like SAP integrations that required manufacturing companies, at least, to completely retool their process. So great gig for a consultant because that could be a multi-year engagement for them. But that came to an end. Basically, everybody that needs SAP has got it installed now. And just in the nick of time, a new technology comes that causes us to rethink the organization, and that's generative AI.
Yeah, I think that actually professional services companies look more like somebody who's might be attacked by this, because this changes their fundamental means of production. And the reason is that we're starting to have digital employees, not just human employees. And my AI journey really began when I was a doctoral student at Harvard Business School back in 1984, 5, and 6. So I got my MBA in 83, and I started to wonder, what's the difference between people and machines, and how do you know? Right. And what are the implications for organizations, for economics, for society? And so I was in that wave of expert systems, and actually did my doctoral thesis looking at how the adoption of expert systems changed the productivity of organizations and roles and organization and process. And so I've been fascinated by this question for a long time. And then 3 years ago, when the Transformer came out, I got in touch with another Harvard Business School grad, and we decided, look, we got to start a company on this, because this is way bigger than the internet. With another professor there, Jeffrey Rayport, he and I created the first e-commerce course there. Actually, in '86, we did the first AI course. My kids used to build expert systems. I say my kids. I was a kid then too, but with another guy named Ben Kaczynski. Ben's down at Emory now, and and so it's just been, I think this is so fundamental. People really need to understand what's going on here. This is much bigger than the internet. It's much different. And I can go into a couple reasons why when
cool.
you're ready.
Well, we'll get into those things. That seems like you just set forth a pretty good agenda for this call. But before we jump into that, let me just cover a couple of your credentials. So you mentioned Professor Jeffrey Rayport at the Harvard Business School, and that's where you're an executive fellow. So you've actually helped him design curriculum. And as I understand it, you've also designed a curriculum around generative AI for the Harvard Business School with him.
Yes, yeah, we're busy writing cases, and right now we're thinking about scaling laws and how do you scale and what that takes.
I noticed that on the GAI blog. So I went to GAI Insights, where there's a resource center, of course, and there's a blog. And I noticed that that's one of the topics that you cover,
Yeah,
this question of scaling, and kind of getting out of the purgatory of tests and trials and prototypes and how to actually scale. By the way, that's a very good topic for this show because I really want to understand that. That's where a lot of companies seem to be getting stuck.
sure. You're absolutely right. All the data would agree with you.
Eh, And then
Yeah,
before we jump into all of that, just to cap off on that first bit there, we mentioned PwC, and for the people who are listening, if you're not familiar with the big advisory firms, PwC competes with Deloitte and McKinsey and Accenture and other major consulting firms around the world. These are global companies. It's a gigantic industry where they provide insight and advice. But very often in the last 20 or 30 years, that's largely been about software development, where they help companies develop new software systems. So, most companies don't develop software, and most companies are manufacturers or they provide a service. And so it's outside their wheelhouse, and they're not quite sure how to get started with a project like that. And back in, oh gosh, I'm trying to think, John, it was probably 2017, 2018.
yes,
You and I had a conversation, I remember in Miami, about
yes,
the looming threat to the advisory for these big advisory firms that artificial intelligence could actually threaten their business. So, just to
yes.
recap that for the folks who are listening, John and I spent a lively evening chatting about the imminent doom of the big advisory firms at the time. It seemed like artificial intelligence, if you could have basically advice on demand from a machine, why would
Right.
you need to hire a consulting agency? Let's start there because I think that was the beginning for me of really taking this wave of AI seriously. And this shift from expert systems, rule based systems, or analytic AI towards generative AI, where it actually creates new content. Now, that's a pretty big shift. So, why don't we start
Huge.
with that idea, that transition?
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's amazing is the easy way to think about these tools. I think is they're like power tools for symbol and knowledge work. So if
Hmm.
you came home and you saw, you'd hired an electrician to put a couple of outlets in, and you came home and that person had a hand drill, you'd be like, "What the heck? I'm paying you 150, $200 an hour. Why don't you get a power drill?" If you walk down a cube farm or you look across an open office plan and people are working on computers and they're not using AI and generative AI, they're essentially using hand drills. They're sitting there like this, right?
Hmm.
Because these are, unbelievably powerful tools. So that's super important to know. The second thing is that because you're talking to them, this is the first time in a long history of automation since it began. And, depending upon, you can put it thousands of years ago, and, there's some stuff in Persia where they were creating little robots, things like that. So wherever you peg it, 150 years ago, 1,000 years ago, the robots never talked back to us, and now they do. And the reason that's important is that the operating system of companies and society at large is conversation and stories, right? People get inspired by stories. They kill each other over stories. Conversation is the mother's milk of human interaction. And now we have a silicon hive mind that is part of that. That has read everything, that can opine in all kinds of things. So that's profoundly different than the internet or metaverse.
This idea of talking to a machine is something that, when you say it that way, it sounds very strange, sounds very odd. But in fact, we do it every day. I was just on a call with a healthcare company and I was talking to their, voice system, whatever it is, but it was actually quite effective.
Yeah.
In some respects, when they work, it's actually better talking to the machine than talking to a human being. It's faster and more efficient. Of course, when
Yeah.
they don't work, they're frustrating, right? So there's that issue.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the
That's like,
intelligence, if you think of it as like the machine IQ has been going up tremendously,
yeah, that's
right? And its ability, I'm sure your audience is familiar with the Turing test invented by Alan Turing back in 1936, the genius who brought us, the notion of a Turing machine, which underlies pretty much all of computer science. And also was the guy who broke the Enigma code. And for that, because he was gay, the the UK government chemically castrated him.
yeah, I
And
know. That's a
kill
weird
himself.
story. It's a troubling
But
story.
anyway, the notion of being able to talk back, that you can't tell the difference if you're talking to a machine or a human, that was the Turing test, and we've passed the Turing test for
Yeah,
sure.
that's right. That's for
And
sure true. And
and
we're getting to a point now where deepfakes are so compelling
oh
that
yeah,
it's going to be very hard to tell if the person on the Zoom call is a real person. I think in a year or two that distinction is going to be erased or
yeah.
blurred.
Well, I think that we're going to see a really odd combination of the fragmentation of consensus reality and the acceleration of scientific knowledge. And
That
those
is a big disconnect. Yeah, that's a big disconnect.
that's
Let's
a big
unpack that.
distinction.
That's a good. Tell me more.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to pass a law that says, and nobody's ever going to pass this, that says you cannot use a technology that wouldn't come from your belief system. So if you're a young earther and you think that the earth was born 5,000 years ago, you shouldn't be able to use the internet, a cell phone, anything, because the science that got you those technologies also says you're wrong. So if you want to be a fundamentalist preacher, you can go and live like an Amish person, stand on the corner, but you can't use TV. Uh, unfortunately, that law is not going to pass. We got, Mike
But your
Johnson.
point, I take your point. I mean, I know you're joking, but I take your point, which is that people can have belief systems that are fundamentally disconnected from scientific reality, and yet they're equipped with these high-powered
Right.
scientific
Yeah.
tools that help them accelerate the dissemination of those ideas. And so it is a very strange disconnect. And by the way,
Yeah.
I think society is, it's in a way under assault from this now because it's so easy to mass
Oh, yeah.
produce misleading information. You see it every day in social media. Some
Absolutely.
people swim in those waters all day long. They don't have any appetite for mainstream media or traditional news. They're no longer consumers of that. So
Yeah.
that's all they're exposed to is these kind of sometimes warped screeds based on an emotional rant versus any kind of logical or analytical
Yeah.
framework.
I mean, you think about, look, what are the algorithms of Google and Facebook and so forth. They have a computational model of my cognition, and they have a computational model of my social cognition, right? My social group and network. And I have actually, when I was a doctoral student, we did a lot of work with mathematical sociology and the power. You can show that ideas propagate, and they're contagious. Even obesity is contagious if you look at the social network stuff. So it's very, very powerful. So now you've got that, and their model is to go deeper and deeper into the amygdala. They don't want you dealing with your prefrontal cortex, right? They want you like going from stimulus to stimulus to stimulus, and that's a very bad business model, especially for society, especially when it's unregulated. If you think of the
Yeah.
other media,
It's a great
other
business model for Facebook, right? That makes it highly addictive. It makes it almost impossible to stop.
I own
It's
Facebook
like
stock, sure, and I own
it's
Google,
like eating
right?
Pringles potato chips from the can. You just can't stop.
Exactly. It's yeah. So we're all getting fat brains, right? In the sense of that, the challenge here is that, I think, I mean, if you look back, the simple and probably simplistic way I look at history is that a combination of colonialism, capitalism, and the Catholic Church took Western epistemology out of the Enlightenment and basically slammed it across the globe, and really stomped out other ways of thinking. Like,
Yep.
I was rereading Carlos Castaneda, like the Yaqui way of knowing. That just
Mhm.
wasn't acceptable to colonial,
Yep.
Spain or colonial,
The Mayan and
England.
Aztec codexes were burned, and they wiped out all the knowledge of that culture. Yes,
Right.
that's a very famous story of colonial oppression. And we live with the consequences of that today because we're stuck. We're kind of hardwired to mono thinking, sort of a monolithic thought pattern.
Exactly. Yeah.
And,
But
and globalization, frankly, is an outgrowth of that. And globalization, it's like you either opt into globalization or you don't have an economy. So the
well,
countries on the
exactly.
receive end have no choice.
Right.
Then
So
we, we're set up business schools all over the world to teach people in this discipline. So we're promoting it through the education system as well.
yeah, and the wealthiest people in the world right now are stupid epistemologically and morally. So if you look at, the kind of stuff that Elon Musk says, he'd fail out of a philosophy class, right?
Right.
With stupid stuff, right?
Right.
And I used to think it was just an intentional, power thing, but now I think he really doesn't understand it. He's
Right.
a
All
genius
right. So
from
he's not just a troll. He's actually quite
like stupid.
he's quite stupid when it comes to actually candidly.
Your Thiel's doing, if you're against AI, you're the Antichrist. I mean, how idiotic is that? I mean, give me a break. I mean, look, just because you're rich doesn't mean you're smart, right? Now, the
Okay. So take me on a little journey here. You mentioned expert systems several times at the beginning of the show.
sure,
And for the folks who are listening, that's kind of an old approach to AI. So artificial
Absolutely.
intelligence itself is not new. It's been around since the 1960s. It's got a rich heritage, but it's also
Yeah.
had its peaks and valleys. And at one point, there was a belief that if you trained an artificial intelligence, if you built a system and programmed it with enough rules,
Right.
and you just had an expert set down all the rules for baking or
Correct.
all the rules for doing a financial plan,
Yes.
then
Yes.
you could actually create a system that would automate that. And it wasn't a bad theory. It just turns out that you need an awful lot of rules. And many of the humans who are considered experts have internalized that logic such that they can't actually identify the rules. Nevertheless, those systems work. They served us well. If you scan a check on your phone, that thing that's reading your signature is that old fashioned analytical AI. And we've had that for 30 years. So this is not a new thing.
Absolutely.
And it's actually quite reliable. But that's partly because it's programmed. And the difference here is the difference between programming and training. So now we have these AIs, and we're not quite sure how they work because it's like an emergent capability. When you throw enough data at the generative AIs, they start to demonstrate capabilities that we didn't actually plan or program
Exactly.
intentionally. And as a result, we can't actually tell you how it works. And when I say we, I mean the people that built them can't tell you how it works. Now, John, this introduces some kinds of, I think, risk factors for corporations. And I think it explains why companies are a little hesitant to jump into generative AI because it seems like it's uncontrollable or unpredictable. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's first of all, very well said in terms of there's not functional understanding of exactly how these models work. The way I think about it is we're managing them behaviorally, right? We put a bunch of stuff in, we look at a bunch of stuff out, and we try to change its behavior through human feedback, right? So we're not managing it from the process out, right? And so
And we
that's
know it doesn't think the way we think, so it's not really a model of human cognition. This is a mistake I think quite a few people, and even people who are quite knowledgeable about this, they fall into that pitfall where they say, well, it's a kind of human intelligence or an extension of human intelligence. I don't think that's really true. I don't think it's a reflection of the way we think. And we
well,
certainly, I'm not trained on billions of images of cars to learn what a car is, right? I have a
right.
different way of arriving at that understanding.
Yeah, well, absolutely. The way I think about it is, look, birds fly, planes fly, right? They fly differently. Machines think, people think, right? And it's almost irrelevant to an airplane how a bird flies, give or take, right?
But at least we understand both modes of flight. We can't say the same about both modes of intelligence.
Correct. Yes, it's an emergent property and pretty profound. Back to your question of risk, I
Mhm.
think there's different things that people do. First of all, when you're managing a business, there's lots of things you can do to contain the risk. Like, if you're one retailer we work with, for example, if they have a mistake in the generation of a new idea, for a product, well, that's not going to hurt anybody. If you have a medical diagnosis that's wrong, that's going to hurt somebody. And so there's the risk of that. And then the other thing that's happening is there's all kinds of truth making mechanisms. So a lot of people look at generative AI and get worried that, hey, it'll never be 100% right. And that's true. It won't because of the way the math works. But the what we're seeing evolving is stuff that looks a little bit like what we saw in the 1980s plus the neural networks, which is more general knowledge. I think that the evolution of these models is going to go as follows: that you have a stimulus, comes from a human or a machine, that gets parsed, and you say, oh, we can actually look that up. That we can give to a traditional model. That we can give to a large language model.
Right.
Then there's going to be a truth function coming out of each of those activities. Is it high enough, right? And there'll be a quality truth function. And there's lots of things going on already implemented, like, maybe you have three models judge and you take a vote, or you parse it a different way, or you do alternative answers, or you do some kind of match. Okay, that's your quality or truth function for each of those subcomponents. There's a reassembly function, and then there'll be another truth function, and then it will give you the answer. That's kind of how, like GPT-5 works. You know what I mean?
So that's
Does
interesting. Okay, so
part.
you're saying that the generative system is, in a way, its work is checked by an analytic system,
Correct.
or at least there's a way to compare results, and then if there's a distinction between them, you can investigate and maybe determine how you arrived
Yes.
at that. Because this is one of the biggest problems. Generative AI is not explainable, right? So if you're in a
Right.
regulated industry, or if you have a shareholder obligation or fiduciary obligation, you have a requirement to understand how these systems work, and we
Yeah.
simply can't explain it. Even the people that made them, they cannot unpack it. It's a black box.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there's some folks out there. Anthropic's working hard on this. There's a company out there called Seeker that actually does a whole platform that is explainable AI. And the way they do it
Really?
is that you have exposure to from the question and answer pairs through the data, through the training, all the way through. And so the large models aren't going to give you access to the data, whether they're Chinese or American. Even the open Chinese models don't give you access to the data.
Yep.
And then they certainly don't give you the, the reinforcement learning microstructure, right, that they did. Somebody like Seeker, and that's actually their brand differentiation, is that if you must be able to explain it, you should use Seeker.
That makes a great deal of sense. I'm thinking anyone in the finance industry, a field that is a very good fit with artificial intelligence, but not good with generative AI in the sense that they have a regulatory obligation to be transparent to regulators, and they don't seem to be able to
Sure.
do that with generative AI. So that could be quite a good outcome. I have
Yeah.
heard this about Anthropic too. So tell me a little bit more about Anthropic's positioning here, because they seem to be more business friendly or industry focused.
Yes, they're very much. This new data that came out that shows that Anthropic's actually very strong on the business to business side. If you look at OpenAI, they're trying to do business to consumer and business to
Yeah.
business.
Yep.
Whether you saw their announcement last week with Walmart, which is a huge deal because we're going from search engines to answer engines.
Yeah.
And the a good rule of thumb that we created when we did a market space course, which was the first e-commerce course at HBS, Harvard Business School, back in the 90s, 95, January, was anybody who's first in the demand chain wins. So if you can sense demand first before anybody, and you can do that at scale, you win. So what happens before purchase? Search happens before purchase.
Yep.
What happens before search is exploration of intent. The models get an intent before search, before purchase.
Hmm.
And so when OpenAI sees 700 to 800 million people a week, and then they partner up with Walmart, who sees at least 60 million Americans or more a week,
Hmm.
and that becomes the front door. And then Walmart then leverages that using their physical infrastructure the way Amazon does. I look at that. That is a profound thing people have not been paying enough attention to. I wrote a Forbes article about a little week before last that talks about it. But this is a huge deal because, if you think about these models, they live on data flows.
Yes.
And the data flow of intent that goes through the Walmart ecosystem is massive. You have to remember, Walmart's revenues are bigger than the GDP of Argentina,
Wow.
and even without the 50 billion.
And Amazon, right? They're bigger than Amazon, although they don't get the valuation benefit of it. Okay, so Walmart's got all this very recent, very current information about what people are thinking about, what they're interested in. Package it up for me. What do you think that experience will look like when they partner with OpenAI? What will the consumer experience of that be?
Yeah,
It
well,
won't
first
be
of
an
all,
OpenAI product. It'll be a Walmart product, right? You'll encounter this on Walmart.com.
I,
But we don't know.
I don't know how they're going to brand it, to tell you the
Okay.
truth, whether it's, OpenAI Inside or whatever. If you step back, think about it analytically for a minute. What do you want to own? What you want to own is models of reality at scale that are byproducts of your normal business, right? Because then your digital twin, or whatever we're going to call it, right?
Mhm.
So you want to own that stuff. You want to own proprietary information flows. You want to own things that have natural economies of scale, and you want to own. I think you want to own trust, like if because with all the fakes that are coming, there's going to be a premium on a brand or an issue that I can trust. So, like in the medical field, for example, there's a lovely product called Open Evidence that looks at all the different research that's out there, and doctor use of open evidence is going like this because as knowledge gets faster and there's more noise in the system, doctors want to be able to touch a trusted source as they're getting themselves prepared to take care of clients, right, and patients. So trust, these are all things, and Walmart's get an opportunity to do all those things. So what does this mean? This means that you're going to see, well, first of all, let me just say there's lots of stuff that we don't know. There's going to be unbelievable invention. I think there's going to be the most incredible flourishing of entrepreneurship in forever. And it's going to be due to at least three factors. One is the professional class is going to see massive unemployment. So lots of smart people are going to be looking for stuff to do. Second, I think capital access in this country, even with all our craziness, is orders of magnitude better than it is. And I'm using that formally, orders of magnitude, like, 10, 100, 1,000x greater than any other place in the world.
Mhm.
And I think that what's happening is that because of the availability of expertise, that the where you used to have to build up expertise, you're going to be able to buy it, as the phrase goes, service as software, right? You're going to be
Yeah.
able to buy expertise, and whether it's the marketing plan or market evaluation or legal advice. I never sign a contract now that I don't put through a model, and
Really?
so just
Why?
so I'm still buying, huh?
Oh, because you get free advice if you put it through the
Well,
model.
it focuses. So, we're a little company, we're a startup, so we're not a big client. So we get, the okay lawyer at $500 an hour, right? And so, what does that lawyer do? That lawyer assembles a bunch of, what does an okay lawyer do? They assemble for a small account. They assemble a bunch of stuff, like an operating agreement. And, that's so we're sitting, my partner and I were sitting there for like an hour looking at the operating room. We're like, what's the difference between a member an officer and all this other stuff? We finally woke up and said, feed it to the robot. We gave the
Yeah.
robot our 5 questions, came back, and so now I can
So they'll
turn that
harmonize pieces of the contract that have been cobbled together. Oh, that's smart.
and I can go back to that $500 an hour lawyer and have him. It's a him in this case. Act like a $1,500 or $2,000 an hour lawyer because I'm asking very pointed questions
Yep.
and he's giving me very specific answers. But if I didn't have the robot, I'd be wasting all this time with a guy who's kind of okay, good.
So yeah, it's probably worth mentioning that any attorney who isn't currently using an AI as an intelligent assistant is probably behind the eight ball, right? Right now, it seems to me everyone. I work with 5 different law firms in my businesses, and they're quite candid about when they turn to AI.
Yeah.
Like they're not hiding it. They're quite transparent about it. But they're like, let's ask the robot.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, another good analogy. We talked about power tools, so they're not using hand drills; they're using power
yeah.
drill. Another good analogy is a chef. If you know anything about chefs, they come with their own knives, right? No one would hire a chef without their own set of knives and tools. Well, that's where professionals are going. We're all going to be chefs. It's like, okay, Robert, what robots do you use
Yep.
and whether you use them directly or your group uses them, every human being will be a platoon.
This is a really good point, John. And this is my observation that what people are doing right now in this moment, where I see many companies are a little hesitant about how to deploy AI at scale through the corporation.
Sure.
And very few companies have reorganized their whole process around AI at the center.
Right.
But individual employees are actually paying for their own AIs of choice so that they can hone a skill set. They can start to define their own skill set. And in my own work, I see this, and frankly, everybody that I talk to here in Los Angeles, there's a lot of resistance to AI in the motion picture business, but
Yes.
individually, everyone I know is dipping a toe in the ocean and they're saying, well, okay, I use Perplexity as an answer engine. I use Claude for literary writing purposes. It's quite a good assistant for that. ChatGPT, it's a little more analytical. The writing isn't quite as good, but it's got great answers. Or I use Dolly, or, everyone's starting to assemble their own palette, I guess. Like you said, your own kit of knives if you're a chef,
Yeah.
and you develop a little expertise with them. One of the challenges with that is you never stop learning. You have to
That,
practice those skills every week because the models keep getting better and better. It's such an extraordinary time.
yeah.
I have a
Yeah.
team that benchmarks AI across the board, from the chatbots to the image generators to the video and voice generators, because we're using it to make television, make short films,
Sure.
and every week there are advances. Every week there's a new solution or there's some new approach that's taken. So you can keep yourself quite busy just staying on top of the rapid progress in the field.
Well, we do a new, we're the only company that does a news show 5 days a week where we review 6 to 8 articles on AI
Wow.
and we look at research, case studies, product announcements, regulatory stuff, and we rate them essential, important, or optional for somebody interested in AI. And anybody's can get that at GAI Insights .com. Just sign up for the newsletter or watch if you want to watch the thing live. We stream it on YouTube and linked it. But yeah, we've done 423 shows, and so we do it every morning. And it's
That's very useful. So you break it down and tell people what nuggets of wisdom they can
yeah,
extract.
yeah, what you
Hey,
can look at. We try to help them.
hey, John, we're going to go to
Thing
break
here.
in a moment
Sorry.
here. So we're going to have to go to break in a moment. So let's hold it for 1 second. But before we do, one of the things that Brett and I like to do on the show to get to know our guests
Sure.
is a series of short answers. So I'm going to give you questions. Just give me the first answer that comes to mind.
Sure.
So here we go. This is what we call the lightning round.
Sure.
Okay, great. So first question for you. What was your first encounter with the future as a child? Was something like science fiction, maybe a movie or a book that you read? What was your first encounter with science, with the future that got you inspired?
Yes, the New York World's Fair in Flushing, where I saw the AT&T video phone.
Trilon and Perisphere. I can't even say it.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Next question. Who is a futurist who inspires you?
Uh, uh, oh, come on. Harari's his last name. I'm trying to remember
Oh,
his first name.
Yuval Noah Harari.
Yeah, you don't know Harari. Yeah.
Right on.
Yes.
Author of Sapiens and
Yeah.
Homo Deus and so forth. Okay. Next question for you. What is a forecast or prediction that you encountered early in life that has made the most profound impact on you?
Um, the evolution of the internet as the critical access and transaction structure of the world.
And what is a technology that you think had the biggest impact on society?
Um, Birth control.
Great, fresh answers. Folks, you've been listening to The Futurists. I'm Rob Tercek with Dr. John Sviokla, and we're going to be right back after this word from our sponsor. Hey there, welcome back to The Futurist. I'm Rob Tercek, and this week I'm talking to Dr. John Sviokla, a friend of mine from before the pandemic, but I'd fallen out of touch with. I was very happy to reconnect with him here because John's a deep thinker about the long-term implications of technologies. He always has been. And of course, now he's focused on generative AI at GAI Insights, where you can read their thinking and their blog and their reports and find out about their analysis of this rapidly evolving field. Now, John, one of the things that's been on my mind is that companies are challenged to integrate AI, particularly generative AI, for some of the reasons we mentioned before the break, the distinction between generative AI and analytic AI or predictive AI, the kind of traditional AI, if you will. But there's another challenge here, which is that if you're really, truly going to commit to artificial intelligence, then you've got to reconfigure your entire business process around AI, and that is a considerably challenging undertaking.
Yes.
Have you encountered customers or clients or enterprises that have had some resistance, where you've had to kind of like talk
Yes.
them over the hump there?
Yeah, absolutely. We have. The first thing to keep in mind is that we're talking about two different populations. We have the early adopters that are understanding that AI is not a technology, it's a capability. And the distinction I make there is a technology you can buy and implement, a capability you have to grow. Okay. And you can only really understand it with experience. The senior executives need to experience it. Describing AI to you is like talking to you about swimming. Till you hop in the pool, you don't know. And so you have to think about any of the different studies you see, like the MIT study that said 95% of people are not getting value. They're an outlier, by the way, and I don't think that was a very well done study. But
I
the
think it was misreported in the press too. That nugget was what was the headline.
no, if you actually look at the study, it's not a very well done study. But anyway, anyway, you're talking about two different populations, and so we are the early adopter population is building as a capability, and we really believe deeply that you have to think about them. If you're building a capability, you have to think about the maturity. And there's four levels to maturity in a model that we created. One is what we call research and experimentation, where you're getting to know what it is, and you're educating and doing briefings. We do that kind of work with. We'll often brief the board of directors and senior management, and then we'll start on helping and skill people with training. Then the second level is islands of automation. Hey, let's put this chatbot in customer service. Hey, let's put Sora in marketing for video and image generation. Okay, great. And each of those may or may not have a net present value or return on investment for that project, right? Then there's kind of a gap, and there's another whole level of system-wide and scaling, right? Like when you really scale these things, you make it part of the core business. So in there'd be a company like Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan that's been going after, and we wrote about it in the Harvard Business Review. They've been going after AI for over 5 years, and they have over 115 active agents in a $35 billion insurance company interacting with over 500 APIs in their legacy systems at scale, right? So now scaling is another whole animal. And then the fourth category is what we call emergent intelligence. This is where AI starts to build the AI. Now, so far, the only industry that we've seen that does that is technology. So
Yep.
Jensen Huang will talk about that. Sam Altman will say, 70 to 90% of their code is written by AI, right? So I think that we'll have emergent companies in most major industries where the AI will start building the AI. Now, this maturity model is an acronym of RISE, research, innovation, scale, emergent. And the problem with the discussion of corporations is that people often are just all over the place. So we have not seen a single organization jump straight to level three.
Oh
Right.
no, that would be a very hard thing to do with a business
It's
that's currently
People
running.
talk
Like,
about it all the time. They say, "Oh, we should," like Lego. Here's a perfect example. CEO of Lego comes out and says, "Oh, we're doing all this stuff with generative AI. We had too much going on. We had to rationalize it." Well, the real story is they couldn't rationalize it if they hadn't gone through levels 1 and 2 with the experimentation and islands of innovation, right? And so now, sure, he's at level 3 or entering level 3, but without that first part. And what happens? The challenges, and look, I have a lot of respect for the consulting profession. I made most of my money in my life in consulting. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to jump organizations to level 3. They're coming in and saying, okay, we'll do an analysis, and they have all this wonderful rational conversation about, of course, you don't want to just do little things here and there. You want to have, you really want to make a big change, ROI. It's like, yeah, you do. But right now, artificial intelligence is so scary because our myths in the Western tradition around technology, smart technology, are all bad. Icarus, Prometheus, Frankenstein, Terminator, right? It never ends well, right? And and so there's that. The Hindus are a little more creative about that stuff, but Western tradition, bad news, right? Smart and not good. So that's underneath. The other thing is that artificial is hard to define. Intelligence is hard to define. Putting those things together, it's like, as my friend Ben Kanzis used to say, when vacuums collide, it's totally undefinable for most people. And the worst yet for executives, because there's been so much talk about this, the window has closed for them to say, hey, what is this stuff? I really don't understand it.
right, right.
So
They have to
what you
pretend
have,
that they know.
I mean, one of the great core competencies of Harvard Business School's executive education that I taught in a lot is basically letting people learn stuff they should have known anyway, without embarrassing them,
Yep.
right? And so what we find is that people are talking with great confidence about AI. They have no idea what it is, and when you come into an organization, try to hop into level 3. That's just total baloney. People talking past each other.
Well, there's one other aspect of that as well, which is I find a lot of times the senior leadership, like the senior executive of a large organization, doesn't always know what goes on down inside the machine, inside of the corporation, right? In the lower levels of the company.
Sure.
And what they get is a lot of reports. So they get this sort of distillation or abstraction of business
Right.
process without actually being hands on. People who have worked their way up from the inside of the organization to leadership, they understand all the knobs and levers because they've been there, they've touched them, they know what they do. But for people who've come in, say, for instance, a company switches out its management team and brings in people from another field. It happens all the time in big
Right.
corporations
Sure
because
does.
they're very good at running, large scale enterprise. They understand how to report. They understand how to deal with shareholders, but they might not understand what's going on inside the machine. These people are dramatically ill equipped to manage this transition because they don't know which parts to change out. They don't know
Right.
where AI is going to make an impact, and they don't know where there might be a gigantic risk. So as a
Yeah.
result, they're hesitant. Now, how do you approach that? Because there's a lot of fear involved, right? This is
Absolutely.
gigantically risky, and it's not just people are hesitant because they don't understand. There's real consequences if they get it wrong. You could tank the company.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think all firms are on what I call a T60 timeline. We're T minus 60. And what 60 is 60 months. You have either 60 months or less to go from a human centric organization to a hybrid organization. And that hybrid organization has a combination of humans and machines. Okay. You have digital employees and human employees. And if you don't do that in the next 60 months or less, you're not going to be competitive. You still might be in business. Look, Macy's is still in business. Is Macy's a healthy business? No.
Hmm.
Right. And if you get on the wrong side of that, you don't get the talent, you don't get the leading customers, and you don't get the capital. So that's all happening very quickly. Now, let's say, as you say, come in, you have new management, doesn't understand a business. The progression is still pretty straightforward, which is you have to spend somewhere between 3 and 9 months educating and having people use hands-on stuff. Then you spend another 3 to 18 months, depending upon how quickly you are, on islands of automation. At that point, you're ready to start saying, okay, let's look at the system. Let's look at scaling.
Hmm.
So basically, 9 to 18 months, you can take any organization and get them to the point where they can really act.
Wow. Okay, that's the most optimistic thing I've heard from a guest on this show in many, many weeks. So thank you for sharing that with me. Let me put a little historical context on this for folks who are listening. Usually, when we talk about the system-wide implications of artificial intelligence, we're talking about a general purpose technology. And so we hear that term GPT, and we think that stands for GPT, like GPT-5, like General Pre-trained Transformer, which is one of the ways to describe these large language models and how they're applied. But the original GPT is a general purpose technology. Think steam engine, or putting a steam engine on a locomotive. You create railroads and national transport or telecommunications. The internet is also an example of that. Electricity is an example of that. So these are technologies, they're called general purpose because they apply to so many industries.
Yes.
And they're so fundamental that they're going to cause you to reorganize the industry. The examples I love to use are the way factories in the 19th century were reshaped with the advent of electric motors, right? So you started with steam engines, and that meant that the entire factory ran on this system of belts and pulleys and spindles and axles that were all driven off of a single motor. And as a result, the factory was vertical and kind of narrow. As soon as electric motors came, you could rethink the process because you could put electric motors at each different station. You didn't have to have them all connected to a belt and a pulley system. And so you put little electric motors throughout the whole factory, and you could have horizontal factories the way we have them today.
Absolutely.
That's one example. And what that made it possible to do is help people specialize. You could move parts around faster. You weren't banging into things. There were fewer injuries. There's a lot of benefits that came from that. The main one is that you're not moving things up and down in a vertical factory. You're moving them across, and that's way more efficient and way less risky. Another example, of course, is Henry Ford's assembly line, right? So that's an application of the ability to use electric power to move the actual parts that are being built, say in this case a car chassis, to the workers instead of the workers moving parts to the thing and bolting it together. The huge efficiency gain, the ability to crank out 100 times more cars in a single day and drive the cost down. So when you reorganize your business with a general purpose technology at the core, you can unlock tremendous productivity gains. Now, this is the promise of AI, right? This is the promise. It's going to unlock tremendous productivity gains. And the specific fields where that's going to happen are the fields that haven't seen productivity gains. So we have had tremendous productivity gains the last 30 years, mostly in the fields of manufacturing, retail, distribution, places where we could apply automation at scale. We haven't been able to do that, though, in fields that require a lot of human labor, things like healthcare, entertainment, education, banking. These are highly regulated businesses. They move rather slowly and they innovate very slowly, partly because they've got so much legacy stuff they're dragging forward and they're under obligations to regulators that slows them down. In a way, they've kind of optimized their operations for the regulation.
Sure.
And then finally, the human workers themselves. I'm here in Los Angeles where the guilds, the unions that manage the creative talent are firmly opposed to artificial intelligence and any kind of automation. They're doing their job. They're trying to protect jobs for their membership.
Yes.
But all these things tend to slow those businesses down. Now, this is where I see great opportunity for AI. Any field that hasn't seen the productivity gain, any field that's got a high amount of human labor, is a field where you could probably apply AI and unlock tremendous productivity gains, which means benefits for customers, benefits for end users, lower costs, and probably higher profits. So these are really great potential benefits, but getting from here to there is a massive undertaking.
Yeah, absolutely. And, back in September 23, we wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review that introduced this framework we call WINS, which was, is the work made up of the creation or improvement of words, images, numbers, and sounds.
It's great. That's like a recap of the symbolic language processor, information processor. So
And
that describes an awful lot of white collar work, right?
it sure does. And then how digitized is it? If it's already digitized, and if it's high on both of those, like for consulting firms with lots of movies and so forth, lots of parts of movie, then you're what we call in the crucible, right? Because the core production is getting changed. I think that there's the other thing to remember about the Industrial Revolution. It was also a knowledge revolution. So you had Fred Taylor and you had business improvement. So Ford not just the assembly line, but how you study the best process, how you improve that process, and basically how do you take the power of knowledge out of the guild and into management and capital,
Yeah.
right? This is why Karl Marx hated Fred Taylor, who invented scientific management, because he could see the disempowering of work because you were sucking the brains out of work, labor, and putting it into management and engineering. And that's
Yep.
continued. Unions have gone from 40% to 6%, right? And, so.
Now, I'll tell you, we're quite explicit about that at one of my companies. We are having agentic system engineers work very closely with people who have high skills to extract the expert knowledge from their head and turn that into either the prompts or the structures that manage AIs, or sometimes a suite of agentic AIs. And I think this is a very good thing to do. Now, for the person whose information is being extracted, you can imagine that feels like a threat, right?
Well,
But I don't think that's actually how it plays out. That person ends up
it
being
feels
able
like
to,
this is a threat.
well, but they actually get to orchestrate these agents, and they're going to become way more productive in their work.
Yeah, look, the question is who gets the benefit? Anytime you have an innovation and automation, who gets the value? There's only three places the value can go. It can go to the customer in a lower price, higher quality product. It can go to the investor in a higher return, or it can go to the labor in higher wages and training. Now, since the collapse of communism, the whole conversation of how much you go to labor has been pushed off the stage, right? And I think that the success of a whole conservative agenda to push labor power down has been, and you can see it in the wages. I'm not making a political statement. Look, wages haven't, as a percentage of economic value in the economy, wages have gone down to about half of what it used to be in terms of where the surplus goes. It goes to the investor and the owner.
Right.
Okay. So
Key point. If we're talking productivity gains, that increases the profit pool, and the profit pool is where wage gains would come from. Productivity has gone up in many fields, not all, but in many fields the last 30 years, but wages have been stagnant. So that means the profit's going someplace else, and that would mean in the pockets of capital.
well, yes, but don't forget consumer surplus because productivity doesn't measure consumer surplus. So Gmail is better than the U.S. Post Office, but it doesn't show up in any number anywhere because it was given away to the customer for free. So productivity is a very flawed measure, especially when we're talking about symbol work, right? Because the quality improvements do not get into the equation.
Oh, right. So the result for us is lots of free tools that work great, and we don't have to pay for something that we used to buy in a store that was shrink wrapped in a box.
Or
Now we just get it as a software on our phone, and we take it for granted until it doesn't work, and then we complain about it.
a great example is my favorite socialist enterprise, Craigslist. I'm just kidding around about the socialist enterprise. His revenue per employee is over 10 million bucks, and he only charges for
Job listings,
pardon me?
job postings, right?
Job postings. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes. And so, but what did he do in the meantime? He took the billions of dollars of revenue and profit that used to be in classified advertising and he gave it to the customer.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
It
So
destroyed the newspapers along the way,
correct. So
unfortunately.
that actually took the productivity number about newspapers down
Yeah,
while the actual productivity was going up. It's just not measured.
got it. Okay, so that's what you mean by consumer surplus. What we get is the ability to sell, like stuff that we have in our house for free on Craigslist with no
Which is
commission to them.
fantastic. I mean, I'm old enough that you used to have to pick an ad, right?
That's
I'm
right.
gonna get rid of this.
$35. You go stand in line at a booth in a newspaper's
Right,
office.
yeah.
Like,
Now just somebody, put it up on Craigslist. Somebody comes to my front door and bang. And so that
it's
where
funny
we
how
are.
quickly we adopt to these things. We take it for granted, and then it's very hard to remember how cumbersome the old process was in the past.
Yeah. And
But
economists
internally, inside of
not too
companies,
creative, huh? What?
inside of companies, there are similar transaction costs. So it's like, let's use that analogy of taking a classified ad and going down to the newspaper office and standing
Yep.
in line and paying $35 to get a 5-line ad for your used car or whatever.
Sure.
Inside of corporations, there are people who have information and people who need the information. And so there's a whole layer of middle management inside of companies, clerks, people like product marketing managers or
Sure.
product managers who are basically taking information from one group and reformatting it and presenting it to another group that needs the information. And this is expensive for companies. These people are on the
Very.
payroll.
Yeah.
In my mind, this is the first thing that's going to get automated away because that job function, if you have an AI, let's say an agent that's tracking whoever's doing that work, the information is automatically going to be formatted in the format that the other party needs. You don't need that internal team to reformat and ship it around.
Yeah. Well, you got a couple of things going on. First of all, you have what I call Socrates at scale, which is that dialogue is the best way to teach somebody. I mean, if you look through the millennia of education, it was all tutors until the Prussians invented the current crappy system we have of 1 to 30 and everybody in the same grade and stuff like that. The yield on that is 2 standard deviations worse than tutoring. 2 standard deviations. So if you look at, that basically means if you could tutor everybody, you could take the worst student and make them the same as the best student today. Okay. That's pretty profound. And so that's Socrates' scale. So you have that inside corporations. Like people, I don't use any of the help functions inside any of the software I use anymore. I simply go to the model. Hey, I'm inside, Slack. How do I do this? Right? Well, think about that for a minute. I mean, and what's underneath that is we're going from fundamentally a bureaucratic management of knowledge, which is you collect it, you organize it, you standardize it, and then you teach to people in a 1 to 30 Prussian-based method, versus having a liquidity of knowledge and essentially a market of knowledge, right? And having a market inside a company in knowledge is profoundly important. And the fundamental skill is I talk to level 3 and level 4 companies, ones that are scaling and so forth. The fundamental skill you have to teach people is to think there'll be tons of automation. Don't get me wrong. And that's going to happen, right? And you see the layoffs are related to that, I think. Anyway, the teaching people how to converse with machines, to really use them as a partner, both as individuals and as groups. So think of it as like special forces. You have a platoon of machines, you have a platoon of humans, right? How do those interact? That is a very different, and going all the way back to Ford, because half of Ford's invention was knowledge management, half was industrialization. But under industrialization is knowledge management, taking it out of the worker. I mean, the word masterpiece comes from when you're apprenticed, as a silversmith, let's say, right? And I apprenticed to you, Robert, right? And then I did my masterpiece and I was admitted to the guild, right?
Right. That's like your graduation ceremony. You have to pass that threshold. You have to get that piece done.
So
each person has to develop their own way of conversing with these machines, right?
And you're going to come up with ways inside the organization. The other thing is we're going to have things that look like quasi firms, which you kind of have now with stuff like Etsy, which is, if I'm an Etsy producer, I'm a combination of an independent sitting on a platform, which is kind of a quasi firm.
Yep.
Varoufakis would call it, you're basically a digital serf. Okay. Is the language he uses, which I think is not far from wrong. His ideas about profit are stupid, but his other ideas are pretty cool. So inside organizations, you're going to have services as software, right? And the fundamental knowledge on demand, Socrates scale, this is profoundly changing, because if my firm can learn 2 standard deviations better than your firm, as long as they're not learning silly things, I'm going to crush you.
Right.
I'm going to crush you. And if people are interested, I have a little TED talk on this. So this is much more profound than the internet, because internet didn't change the way we learn. Okay. This is changing the way we learn.
Oh, right. Internet was information on demand, but you still had to know where to find it, what to ask for, and how to learn it.
Yeah.
You had to read it and process it and integrate it. Here, the AI can actually teach you. I find that's a really helpful way to use these generative tools.
Yes.
Tell me how to understand it. Break it down for me. Give me a lesson. How can I master this? And it will absolutely do that stuff for you.
I mean, this morning, I'm looking at this new probabilistic-based, computing that's built on the Cerebras giant chip, right? And I don't know from Adam. I mean, I know a little bit about computing, probabilistic-based computing. So I'm sitting there with a robot giving a formula saying, how does this work?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's just, and step by step. I understand this. I don't understand that. Could you explicate this? And the thing is that I don't know what the percentage of autodidacts is. The person who goes down to the library and teaches themselves everything they would have got from a college, right? And so let's say it's 2%, 3%. It's not more than 5%, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The autodidacts, they're going to just go nuts. But for the rest of the world, the other 95%, we have to create a socio-technical system that gives people motivation and social proof and all kinds of stuff to use these things in a way that is productive, right? And that's going to be true inside companies, and it's going to be true in education. That's why I think that we're in for a lot of. I think it drives me a little batty when I've got a bunch of friends who are wealthy and they're automating the shit out of everything, and and they're like, oh, we always, people are pessimistic about the unemployment. It's like, we've had other things that we've changed. It's like, well, wait a second. First of all, the first big one, the answer is no, that didn't happen. When we did industrialization, we don't teach it in America, but our labor history was bloody and
Yeah.
ugly.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I'm here in Chicago. There's a lot
Same
of people
market.
beating each other,
Yeah.
Okay. So there's that.
Pullman riots. Like, yeah, Chicago was the nexus
Okay,
of
but
the
we don't teach
conflict.
that to kids anymore, right? We
Right.
kind of start past that. Then the second thing is you say, okay, the computer revolution. Well, what happened in the computer revolution? They were scared to death at the end of the World War II with 13 million American men coming back. They'd seen something else. They'd aged very quickly. Were they going to come back communists? Like what were they going to? And there's this wonderful quote by Levitt, the guy who built Levittown in New York. These manufactured houses that were very affordable and available. And he said, when some guy has a mortgage, two car payments, three kids, a wife, and a dog, he's going to be too busy to be a communist. Okay.
That's true. If you make people
There's a lot of
owners,
truth in that.
yeah.
And so we also had the GI Bill. Social mobility was much greater in this country. Women didn't have to work the way they have to now. Wages were getting a much bigger share of the profitability. You could go and get educated very cheaply for just a couple for like maybe 2, 3, 6 months worth of wages. You could pay for a college year, right? Not now. You got to take 10 years to pay for it, right? Okay. So I think we're back more like the Industrial Revolution, where there was none of the labor liquidity and government investment in upskilling that we had in the last revolutions. And so I think we're in for a rocky road until we step back and we ask two questions. First of all, what's the common good? Who's the Ben Franklin of AI? Who's going to create the public library of AI? Okay. We haven't got that. We haven't got anywhere near enough of that. And the other thing is, what investments are we as a nation going to make in labor liquidity the way that we did before? If we answer those two questions, then I'm very optimistic. If we don't answer those two questions, and we have the $1 trillion in private equity that's sitting on the side come in and just rip labor out of stuff and give all the returns to capital, that's going to be ugly.
Although, okay, I hear this all the time in the show. People come in, I challenge them on this concept because I fundamentally disagree. The idea that AI is going to take all of our jobs,
No,
we're
not
not going to
all.
work, and somehow we're going to all be required to take like a universal basic income. I
Oh,
reject this
I
as
don't believe that.
fallacy. I don't buy any of that.
I don't either.
But I hear it all the time because I think it's very lazy thinking. It's unimaginative. The reality is people adapt, people are smart, and people are inventive. They'll come up with ways to manage these tools themselves. I think your point earlier about there being a lot more entrepreneurs, I think we're already seeing evidence of that. The cost
Yes.
of starting a company has plummeted. So there's very few barriers if you got the motivation. That's not for everybody, but that's one path forward.
But
Tell me what you think the government can do to intervene. Like, what would the path be towards stimulating labor liquidity, as you said?
yeah, well, first of all, Robert, I don't believe in universal basic income because I don't think it gives people dignity in work, right? I think that I believe in safety net kinds of things, and we can go into that. But the I think that first of all, making education cheaper has to be part of what government can do, right? And whether you fund new models, the way they do with the land grant colleges, community colleges and so forth, they should be putting money into like one F-35 costs $100 million, right? So let's throw a couple of F-35s worth of grants at innovators in cities and in rural areas that will actually come up with new modes of teaching. Okay, where you can use these robots, we can actually, help people build their own robots to have their own tutors as they go forward in life. Okay, as far as I can tell, there's no investment in that by the government. Okay, there's the ability to open source more of the models and to actually have more open data sets. Harvard has one that they did. These are all proprietary data sets. There's all kinds of data sets and models that they can make available to the public on a regular basis. I think there's that, right? I think that the investment in core science, on the science of education, is another thing. We're not investing anything in there, as far as I can tell. They're killing, yeah, great. They're killing the education department for all kinds of whatever political reasons. There is science to be done about how the people who built this right? I know Alan Kay pretty well, right? He invented object-oriented programming. The reason this has the pixelation it does is because they did the science at Xerox PARC as to what you needed for proper perception. And they also did stimulus response in terms of reaction time so that people would stay in a flow state while they're doing cognitive work. Well, that's all science that needs to be done. We have to figure out that science. So these are things the government can do, should do, I think. I don't believe in universal basic income because I think work is a dignity thing as well. However, and I disagree with you a little bit here, Robert. 60% of Americans live in paycheck to paycheck.
Yes.
Okay, so you and I don't hang with those people usually, right? Our cohort is going to do fantastic. Those people, my son's a prosecutor in Chicago. Another son, my works as a teacher in Chicago public schools. My wife volunteers full time at a food pantry. Those people, they're getting crushed by AI. And I don't see they haven't got Robert. These people, I was paying a traffic fine. They can't find $100 to get their license back. And I'm not talking about a small amount of people. I'm talking about millions of people.
More than half. Yeah, that's a huge problem.
So
I agree.
I'm talking about those people, okay? Not our friends. Our friends are going to do great.
Right. So there's a big societal divide that already exists. It's going to get exacerbated by this technology. John,
Right.
give me another forecast. Tell me what you've envisioned. How this is going to look in 10 years if these trends persist.
In 10 years, warfare is going to be unrecognizable. You already see it starting to happen with the Ukraine war, where they have miles of roads covered with fishing nets to create a fishing net tunnel that they can actually send their stuff through. So war will be unrecognizable. We're going to have unbelievable breakthroughs in science and material science. We're going to have magical catalysts that'll do crazy stuff and things like that. I think certain diseases will be deeply, if not completely cured. Huge progress. We're going to have huge progress in science. I think that we're going to go one way or another on what we do with the surplus of this. Are we going to make an investment as a country in the factors that make people more productive? And right now we're disinvesting in those on an aggregate and specific basis. And so I think if we don't make those investments, we're going to have more political strife. If we do make those investments, I think we're going to have the most miraculous generation of Americans ever in terms of productivity. But I think that's a political choice. And I think that last but not least, this device is going to be more and more of the intelligence is going to migrate to the edge because that's natural in nature. You look at my finger, it's got all the information to recreate me sitting right here. It's massively redundant and decentralized and localized. And I think that's the natural progression of intelligence, is to have a mesh of complexity and decentralization. And so in our world, in the digital world, that means that this device is going to be hugely important, both in terms of your experience and the overall architecture.
And for the folks that are listening, John's pointing to his Apple smartphone. So we're talking about the phone as a decentralization, instrument of decentralization. Well, John, we could continue on that topic for a long time because decentralization is important. Right now, the AI companies are going the exact opposite way. They're centralizing these huge data sets and they're centralizing the compute power and so forth. Be interesting to see how that unfolds, how open source might challenge that.
Yeah. Don't forget the Chinese are doing, I think, a very smart job of open sourcing more and more powerful models.
Yep.
And with the current...
they're doing that to blunt the edge of the U.S. tech companies. And honestly, if they're successful, they could tip the country into a recession. Well, John, it's been a great pleasure chatting with you. I could go on all day. It's such fun to reconnect with you after such a long time. Thank you for joining us on The Futurists. Where can our listeners learn more about you?
Sure. If you go to GAIinsights.com, you can see all of our different publications, and we have the daily news. It's available by either video or email. I'm a regular columnist in Forbes magazine, also in Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review. I have a lot of stuff out. And then we also have a conference every year, but that's in the September, October period. But yes, just follow us at GAIinsights.com, and we love it. We do it every day. We'll try to instill you for the hybrid future to come.
Super fun. Thank you for joining us on The Futurists, and a big shout out to the folks at Provoke Media that make the show possible. And thanks to all the folks who listen, especially those who send us notes and questions and comments on social media. I'm Rob Tercek, and I'll be back next week with another person who is shaping and influencing and building the future that they envision. Until then, I'll see you in the future.